This is the Voice of Florida Architecture. I'm your host, Rhonda Hammond, AIA. We're here today with the chair of Florida Foundation for Architecture, Stephen Hruby, AIA, and we're continuing our Architecture and You series. Welcome back, Steve.
Good morning, Rhonda. Thank you for having us here. We at Florida Foundation for Architecture are so pleased to be joining you in your mission to promote our profession. As you know, our vision for this series is to explore with our viewers the spaces we live in, work in, play in, and maybe even dream about. We will be diving into a topic that affects all of us in so many ways, even though we don't always realize it. And that is the value of architects and architecture in our daily lives. When you think of architecture, you might think of famous buildings or eye-catching designs, but architecture is so much more than that. It shapes our communities, influences how we feel in space, and helps solve real-world problems, from housing and climate change to safety and public health. Architects don't just design buildings. They imagine better ways for us to live together, whether it's a local library, a hospital, a school, a park, or your own home. There's a lot of thought and care and skill behind those spaces that we make. In this episode, we'll be exploring another example of why architecture matters, what architects really do, and how good design can improve our lives in ways that we might not expect. Today, we're having a conversation with Ryan Richards of RG Architects in Fort Myers, Florida. Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning, Stephen. Thanks for having me.
Ryan is the principal and co-founder of RG Architects, as I said, in Fort Myers, Florida. He holds a bachelor's degree in architecture from the University of Miami. He is serving on the AIA Southwest Florida Board of Directors, where he served as president for 2 years. He is also upcoming chairman for the Florida Foundation of Architecture. He serves on the Lee County Schools Construction Advisory Committee, the Dunbar High School Business Advisory Committee, and Foundation for Lee County Public Schools. He and his firm have won awards. This year, they were designated by AIA Southwest Florida as the Firm of the Year. He's received awards for his Franklin Park Elementary School rebuild, the FGCU Water School, Cypress Lakes Middle School rebuild, and the CSN News Science building. Ryan was a co-founder of RG Architects. At the time, was a small practice powered by the dedication and the personal investment of its three founders. But today, RG Architects is a diverse and dynamic team of 18 full-time professionals that bring a broad range of skills, deep industry knowledge, and a shared commitment to professional excellence. As a minority-owned firm, RGA takes pride in its inclusive culture and strong community ties throughout Southwest Florida. A quote from their website summarizes the firm's philosophy. We believe architecture is more than design. It's a force for good. Our collaborative, client-focused approach helps bring even the most complex visions of life together. Together, we are building a future for our community. Well said, Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan, we want to have a conversation about your schools today. I know your practice is heavily involved in education through primary through higher education. As we mentioned, the purpose of this series, of this podcast, is to communicate and demonstrate the value of architecture to the public. Of all the different building typologies we've highlighted, educational facilities stand out to us as the most impactful, touching every generation with the potential to strengthen the social, cultural, and economic fabric of our communities. This is a huge responsibility. What motivates you and your firm to possess such a successful educational facilities?
For us, it's really the impact. It's, walking in the door afterwards and seeing those students, seeing their eyes light up the first time they walk into their new building. I mean, that's the kind of thing that hits you, in your soul, that makes you realize that all the effort and all the frustration and the struggle that it took to get to this point was all worthwhile. Designing schools is a profound responsibility. Every member of our community passes through schools at some point, right? So we're inherently shaping those future community members. So we see schools as, they're not just an active backdrop. They're a contributor to the well-being and success of students and teachers through their lifelong journey in education. So the more creative and impactful we can make those spaces kind of opens up their mind in a way that they want to learn, they want to explore, they want to open those creative opportunities. And, seeing that impact and then seeing the generations of it is really kind of meaningful, like in a deeper way than, hey, this is a job.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, why we believe schools are so impactful to our communities. You are reaching the broad spectrum of our communities, from the
Like
kindergartner all the way to the post-grad student. It is very impactful. Your firm specializes in primary, secondary, and higher education projects, as I've mentioned. I imagine there are very different criteria and considerations for each of these student age groups. What are those differences, and how do you address them in your designs?
Absolutely. There's huge differences, and it's tightly linked to the evolution of the human mind, right? As we grow and mature, we go through different stages, psychologically speaking. In elementary school, your world is still very small. You're dealing with a tight family group, maybe some friends, but then your eyes kind of open up to the bigger world. But we want to do it in relatively small increments. Classrooms are designed to be more well-rounded in that there's a number of teaching venues in one space. They stay in that classroom for 80% of their day. And then as they move into middle school and high school, their autonomy increases. We give them a little bit more independence at steps, but then also still providing that security, that clear guidance, that safety that makes them feel that they could still create those learning experiences. And then once you get to higher education, it's competitive. It's workforce preparation. So even within the schools themselves, they need to be competitive amongst themselves, but we're preparing them for professional environments. Just like we treat our offices, we want to go to somewhere that we're happy to work at every day. That just brings us such a joy, just a comfortable environment. And then higher education kind of leads people into that path as well. So there's a number of elements that come into it, and I can kind of walk you through a little bit of this if I share some photos with you. So this is one of the schools you mentioned, Franklin Park Elementary School. It is a rebuild. This building that you see up here is, an older mid-90s building that was not taken down, and the rest of it's a new campus. Now, this is somewhat responding to the neighborhood in that it's an underserved neighborhood, so it's internal looking to provide a little bit of extra safety for those playgrounds, knowing that the area that it's in. But then it also has a strong community presence, right? They're a proud community within the school. It's been there for 60 years. So their alumni are the community members. They're the church organizations, the nonprofits, bringing them in and helping them re-envision what their community stands for in the form of a school was really, kind of the driving point behind this. And, this is an elementary school with younger students. So we want to create a little bit of pop, a little bit of excitement, open up the eyes for some creativity, but not overwhelm them and, get them bouncing off the walls. This is, a simple media center with some design elements added into it, but there's just enough color and liveliness to it. And then creating a flexible classroom type atmosphere. So for the younger generations, you're going to have carpets on the floor. There may be nap time still at certain ages. Spending 80% of the school day in this room. Yeah, they go to maybe art and lunch, but they spend a lot of time in these individual classrooms. So it's a completely different approach. And then once they leave, we want to create a little bit of that excitement, right? Pique that creativity, pique that curiosity, create these little intimate spaces that they can kind of find and encounter in their own way. So that's kind of some of the approach that we look at with elementary school students. And this is another example of an early education center, but this is kind of a little bit of a different demographic. This is also an underserved neighborhood, but it's getting students up to par to enter the public school situations. So we ended up with more flexibility, indoor, outdoor spaces. With limited budgets, you can try to utilize things like rooftop in a cost-effective way and create, that indoor-outdoor interaction that really just brings a little bit of pop of color and excitement into these students' lives.
One thing that's interesting, Ryan, I noticed in some of your images that your use of color and the placement of color didn't seem to be arbitrary. It seemed to be a way of wayfinding and a way of identifying individual unique spaces or rooms. Color, it seems like it was used as a identifying and design element, not just decoration.
Absolutely. They all need to be intentional in a way. We use them to separate grade levels. anything to help with wayfinding, and it kind of clears the mental aspect of that mental security of you know where you're going, you know where you need to be. And it's subtle hints that it's not a big gaudy sign, but you know you're going into the blue hallway now. Those little things just simplify the transition and simplify the process so we can focus on what's important, and that's the academics and the learning environment. So anything you can do to move people securely and simply throughout the campus in the form of wayfinding only enhances or gives them that sense of comfort when they get there and they understand the intuitive layout.
With the one school that there was community involvement. Is that
Mhm.
fairly common with you when you're doing schools? Are you engaging the surrounding community and getting input into how the school functions in their community and how it may have other purposes other than day-to-day education?
That varies widely, project to project and client to client. Franklin Park was a perfect example where we had engagements with the United Way and with Lee Health to provide some family care services beyond the actual school itself, right? So creating a secure environment for the students during the day, but having their parents come in for a medical appointment in the afternoon or a dental appointment in the afternoon and creating that separation, right? So just so someone comes in doesn't mean they can just walk into the campus. So you start looking at secondary entrances. Everyone's focused on single point of entry, while there's a student single point of entry, and then there's a public single point entry, and we need to keep them separated to a degree if they're going to function during the day in these same buildings. So yeah, that one is a great example because we had a good group of partnerships, and that's what comes with a school that's 50, 60 years old in an underserved neighborhood with a proud alumni base. Get that level of involvement. And when you're doing things that are pure, expansion of, hey, we need a new school out in this zone, then sometimes you don't have that buy-in, right? It's a brand new school. You don't even have a principal. You have no alumni. You have no students. It's a little bit more difficult in some of those circumstances to get that engagement. But certainly with rebuilds and established schools and helping them out, the opportunities are already there. They're inherently built into that school already. You just need to take advantage of them, support them, and let them grow in a meaningful way.
We architects often talk about how our buildings have an impact on those who use them. Very common theme amongst architects when we all get together over a couple of drinks. Does design impact the quality of education and how students and teachers engage and succeed? And if so, how does that happen? How does design impact them?
Absolutely. Like architecture is that silent teacher. It sets the stage for success. Just like the faculty, if they're happy to go to work and they're comfortable working there, they're going to be more productive. And the same goes for students. They're going to learn better when they're comfortable and they're excited to be there. And it's not just a chore, something to check off. So creating those little exciting moments goes a long way. But then also, things like natural light, daylighting, and creating welcoming spaces, it just inspires the mind, so to speak. It gets you in the mindset to start learning. So we look at just simply walking into a lobby. Is it an inviting space? Is it open? Is it clearly understood where students go? Now, there's specific code requirements that get into where, pre-K can't mix with kindergartens and use to certain stairwells, but you can take all those limitations and use them to your advantage to create some really exciting spaces. This is a early dining hall. Now, this building is a little tricky in that it's pinched into a tight campus, and it's really hard to back away and get a picture of the actual building because you'd back into the building in front of you. But it's all about looking internally and creating, they're only out of their classroom for a couple hours a day. Let's pique their interest. Let's make it bright and inviting and even lunch exciting so that they look forward to it and it's not one of those necessary evils, and kind of creating those type of atmospheres. And so you can see the building, 20 feet outside the door. It's why it's hard to get a good picture of the outside, but it's snuggled in there and you can, just doing the best we can with the available opportunities for natural light and warm, soft palettes and low maintenance materials goes a long way when you talk about life cycle and longevity of these buildings. So sometimes it may look like a little bit of first cost, but once you talk to the maintenance and facilities people, they understand that, hey, you're not going to have to replace it in 7 years because it went bad. So at what point do you actually start saving money by using the right materials for the purpose intended?
That's interesting. That certainly isn't the kind of the cafeteria I went to when I was in high school. It really looks like a fine restaurant that they're going in, which is, I understand. I see your point. When they're half an hour, 45 minutes of lunch break, it makes them feel like they're not in school any longer, but
Hmm.
it's a respite that they can get away from the classroom. So very well done. What techniques do you use in your school design to support a pleasant, engaging educational experience for both teachers and students? I think you started to kind of give us that impression, but can you expound on that a little bit more?
No, it's about human scale design, right? Sometimes when you're building spaces for smaller students, you don't want to overwhelm them too much, but at the
Mm.
same time, you want them to feel comfortable and excited. Um, and then the warm and welcoming palettes, not trying to get too sterile, using color in only the right places and being intentional about it. Things like clear, safe circulation, so it's not a wayfinding issue and they're not confused. And it just kind of keeps the mindset in the right place all day long. Things like acoustic comfort is important. And then that indoor outdoor interaction. No one really truly enjoys being locked in a room for, 6 hours a day. The more we can get them outside, fresh air, natural light, those things just kind of support well-being in general. It makes them comfortable and then eager and engaging to learn. As the human mind develops, we hit that critical developmental stage. I mean, there's a reason everyone remembers the name of their third grade teacher, right? So it's just kind of imprinted. No one remembers the second, no one remembers the fourth, but everyone knows their third grade teacher. That's a psychological evolution level that when you reach that stage, it just kind of imprints you. And it's part of the reason we're targeting fourth and fifth grade students as well, is because for the architecture and education program, it's that imprinting stage where they can kind of create those lifelong ambitions or visions or desires that come pretty very well rounded.
AIA, the Architecture and Education Program, just for our viewers, that is a program that the foundation has supported for years, and it's a curriculum supported by the state. And we have targeted fourth and fifth grade students to introduce them to architecture, why it's important, and what the architect does. And for those very reasons, the students are at a point where they're open. They haven't kind of solidified their opinion on things, but they also are old enough to be able to think conceptually and strategically. So that program has been in a number of schools throughout the state. So I just wanted to put in a plug for our AIE program and let our viewers understand what it is.
This is like that next level, right? So we have the bright curiosity of childhood being kind of nurtured in one way. Here's a middle school that's actually still on our drawing boards. Now we're kind of involving that psychological aspect to a little bit more autonomy. These students now change classes regularly. The world's getting a little bigger. They're going and meet new students and then interact in a more personal way. So having some breakout spaces and some other elements that can, create those social gathering hubs outside of the classroom now becomes a lot more important. So when we look at some of these spaces, we want to, still have the solid academics needed, and middle schoolers are probably the most difficult to deal with. That's a really really awkward age. So you got to build it like a bunker, but then dress it up like a country club. I guess is kind of the way we go about it. But having those levels of experiences within it, between the big gathering spaces and then more intimate little breakout spaces, and kind of still piquing that curiosity, still piquing that creativity, but doing it in a more subdued way that supports autonomy while keeping, security and supervision in mind. And then really have some spaces that they can look at that really kind of just excites the mind in a way. So having those flexibility of, hey, there's classroom periods, but then there's also some really nice things going on, kind of exposing them to the high tech world and some exciting lines and shapes and lights that kind of piques that interest even more. So we're kind of just slowly evolving them into their life cycle or adulthood in a way. Once you get to high school, you start looking at it a little bit differently. Again, this is, same client. This is a STEM building, a science, technology, and environmental. We call it the STEM building, and there's a little bit of playfulness in there as we took it on the lake edge, had the grass and the reeds kind of mimicked in some window-like mullions going up the side of the building. But it's more structured in a way in that it's a true classroom environment, but then it still promotes that openness, that indoor-outdoor feel, even without truly going outdoors. So now high school students have an even greater level of autonomy and a greater level of social availability. And with that comes in, things like athletics and those other parts and pieces that kind of really fulfill the mind in the school day, right? So this is a football stadium we completed for them a couple years back. This is an interesting view. You can see the building right beyond the far end zone is athletic performance center that we completed shortly after the football field. And that this is kind of getting to be almost college prep level, right? You want to prepare them for the next steps at the same time. While we're talking about fitness, this is probably the best seat in the house for a football game, like looking right down the middle of the field from the end zone. And it kind of creates that little bit of excitement, but we're also getting college ready at this point. So you can see like a gradual evolution, and then we feel it follows the evolution of the human psychology at the same time.
Well, that gets us up to the college level, and I know you've done some things at the college level. What's that next step in evolution? How does that work?
Well, colleges are there's a few different aspects to that. One is not everyone is built for a 4 or 5 year college degree, and at the same time, some people are, and how you handle them differently is a little bit independent. So we have a career tech center that's under construction right now that I will share. This is the Heights Career Tech, also again kind of serving somewhat of an underdeveloped neighborhood. But when there's students that aren't ready to go to that 4 or 5 year program, or that's not their destiny, what is their mission? So here we have a 2-story program space where the bottom is marine mechanics, auto mechanics, more of the technical labs, HVAC, electrical, and then upstairs you have more of the nursing components, things that don't need the direct exterior access in those high volume spaces. So we stack these programs on top of each other. This guy is really exciting seeing him come out of the ground. I mean, he's really got an impact right when you turn that corner and come down the street, and it's like it's like what's that doing here? Because you understand the neighborhood that you just drove through when you see it. This is the career tech path, right? So this is after high school, but not college, and enabling people to make a solid living as a professional in certain environments is also a key. That's a viable career path that needs to be, respected in its own way. So I can't wait to have actual photos of this when it's all said and done. But this is a really, really fun project under construction right now. And this water school is one of those truly unique buildings. This is Academic 9, Florida Gulf Coast University, and this is responding to a community need, right? I think we all remember the red tide and the algae blooms that we've been experiencing for years that impact not only our health, but our tourism. There's a lot of parts and pieces that impact that. And this building is designed specifically to help and research and fund students to help mitigate some of those issues. So this is kind of a really exciting plan as the campus is expanding. This is the first building on the other side of the lake. Those available lands. We went lead silver on this and very high with solar photovoltaics and reducing energy costs. FGCU is inherently a very environmental university by nature, but then creating breakout spaces where there's time between classes, students can stop and study and learn, maybe widening the hallways to give them those opportunities to do that, creating those open inviting spaces that even when you're in an office with no windows, at least you have glass out to the hallway, you're not locked in a box, and you kind of still have those interactions. And the great thing about the school is it's multidisciplinary, so people come from a number of different programs and use this building at different times. And how are they going to interact, given those opportunities to give them those interaction spaces with people they may not go to class with or interact with regularly. They just casually pass in certain circumstances. But then supporting the mission, right? At the end of the day, this is a research facility with a cause, with a reason, and giving them the opportunities to do that, even in small, intimate, medium-sized spaces, and having a good bit of flexibility in that regard. And then another one on the drawing board for the same client right now, it's going out in a few months, not quite under construction yet, is we're doing a College of Health Sciences with them. So a big part of our development down here is we're short doctors and nurses in general. So there is a good amount of funding going into from the state regards to health sciences and creating, the needs of our aging population. This is Academic 10, the Marib College of Health Sciences. We're just working on wrapping up CDs here in a few months, and it's treated very differently depending on the solar orientation of the building. It's going to be a lot of fun to go through construction. We've got a great team and a great client in this particular case, so we're working with them tightly on how does shading impact the solar heat gains, doing studies, understanding how the facades really work. The north side's not treated like the south side. They look like almost two completely different buildings, depending on how much sun they get during the day. So kind of really understanding that and then kind of bringing it into an impactful design that gives some indoor outdoor interaction spaces, some breakout spaces, lounges, things like that are more important at a higher level. But this is also trying to prepare them for kind of a corporate workforce type field. So you can see some of the similar elements, but then obviously it's evolved a little bit further above and beyond some of those other aspects that we see. So very high tech medical simulation technology is really kind of off the charts at this level. So getting those specialty sub consultants in there to help design some of this equipment and putting together the right team is really important, as we go through these stages.
Right. One of the things that I had to smile when as you're going through the technical school. I think we often think about technical school as being something that's in a warehouse or a garage. It's very institutional. It's very industrial looking. That wasn't the case with that school. It was very pleasant. It was no less pleasant than any of the other schools that you were talking about. Just because it's technical education doesn't mean it's a second-class citizen in the educational world. So I was very impressed with that.
Yeah, there's somewhat of a stigma associated with it.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, you're just going to tech school okay, you already gave up. And
Yeah.
that's not the case. We can't say everyone's cut out for a 4 or 5 year degree. And not leaving those other people by the wayside is important to the community, to the health of the community, right? So we've got to create it is a social stigma in a way, and how do we mitigate that? We want to create that excitement, a little bit of impact that you're not embarrassed to go to, say you went there.
I hear so many architects complaining about bureaucratic and budget limitations when they work with state or local agencies on public schools or any public project. However, your schools are very unique and wonderful spaces, as we've just seen. How do you navigate these restrictive environments and create such high quality educational buildings?
Every client's not the same. Yeah, funding is tight. We're fortunate enough here in our local district to have a half-cent sales tax. It will sunset in a few years, but that was an acknowledgement, and we actually got involved. I was on the committee that jump-started that program and really pushed it, and it was a little bit of a miracle when it actually happened. But
Can you explain what that program was? Could you explain a little bit more about for our viewers what that program is?
We put a half-penny sales tax on a referendum on the ballot during election approximately 7 to 8 years ago. And that freed up some funding that's not coming from the state. So there's a number of layers to this. When we're talking about expansion and cost of construction, we look at it as like, there's some opportunities here. So the more we can intermingle programming and have multiple uses for simple singular spaces, the higher quality those spaces can be. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's not just used for this one purpose left and then it's done throughout the day. If you can the more multi-purpose you can make spaces, the more opportunity there is to do the right thing for them.
So being putting that on a referendum, that kudos about your community, because the public saw the value in doing that, the value of putting that penny tax on items to support and make better quality educational facilities. So I commend the community for doing that.
Well, we have a very rapidly growing community, and we're also well aware that the state is getting tighter and tighter and tighter year after year when it comes to funding for public education.
You got to point out that you as an architect did something that I don't think many people understand, that you got involved and helped to get that referendum off the ground and advocate for it. We as architects don't always tell that story. We're very involved in communities doing that kind of stuff, and I think the public doesn't always see it. We need to tell our story a little bit better.
That's a great point. And kicking those bushes and getting some extra donors on board, getting the contracting community on board, so hey, this is good for everyone. This is good for future employees. It's good for your business now, and this is really what's needed and it's what's right for our community. So, you're kicking the bushes and trying to stir up those funding dollars, but also going out in the street and sticking yard signs in the ground. You've got to jump into it with both feet, so to speak.
How else do you deal with the bureaucratic quagmire that you have to go through when you're doing a conventional project?
Most of our projects, at the end of the day, our clients are typically the construction and maintenance department, right? Construction and operations, and they're the bottom dollar butts and seats type of mentality, typically. Some of our clients have, architects on staff with a little bit more vision, and they're a lot easier to work with. But when we have those, the operations and maintenance people kind of running the show, it's a little bit more difficult. So we push to have the educators involved in a bunch of these decision makings, bringing in educators, faculty, administration. They have that pull to change their minds. And when we look at Franklin Park, and as the first example I showed, our direct client, the guy that signed our contract was, ultimate. I want a box. It should look like the prototypes. Just drop it in there. And we went through a lengthy process of design charrettes and talking to the principals and the faculty on saying why that's not the right answer in this case. And at the end of the day, he ended up being one of our biggest supporters. He saw the mission of it, the value of it, because of the neighborhood it was in and the problems in that neighborhood. Turning it into an internal courtyard to have that security for the students themselves was an important factor. And once you start breaking into those pieces, those aren't arbitrary decisions being made in that site plan. We want to have different grade levels, different playgrounds, but all internally looking to kind of have them shielded in a way, just because of the nature of the surround. So the more we can get educators involved and even the upper management on the educational side, the more successful we're going to be to create the spaces that truly impact the students at the end of the day. Because maintenance and operation will talk about life cycle cost, and if you can talk them into, hey, this material might be a little bit more at first, but you don't have to replace it for twice as long, then they start to listen. But then having the academics from the other side saying, hey, they're actually advocating for the end users. They're advocating for the teachers and for the students. And sometimes there's a disconnect between those two. Having them all in the same room and going through that design charrette process, that's really where we can get everyone to see eye to eye, having clear expectations. This is, just some pictures. There's, some at FGCU, some here in our office, of how we go about designing, diagramming, working with a wide variety of people to kind of get the goals accomplished. Yeah, it can be sloppy, it can be messy, it can be heated at times, but we all really have the same goal and the same vision at the end of the day. We just need to understand where we want to go. This is another photo from Franklin Park. We went in there, talked to the teachers and the students, and had the students design part of the school. It gives them that little bit of a buy-in that they were part of this process, and then check in with them regularly, and it kind of creates that excitement. And then seeing them walk in the first day after they had to spend a year in portables to let this happen, that's really kind of what makes it worthwhile, and that goes back to the starting point.
When you mentioned the word charrette, for those who don't often hear architect talk, what you just showed was a charrette. It's getting everybody together and designing with the community, with the architects, and it's a team effort to engage the users and the public in the design of the building. What you're saying is your client is very important to the planning and the design of these facilities. And how so? You mentioned a few things that they did, but it seems that they're crucial to how you evolve a design.
Right. And client can be looked at in a few different ways, right? There's, the guy that cuts the check, right? So he's the arbitrary client that everyone sees and understands as the client. But we also see equal partners in that venture being the users, the teachers and the students. They're also clients. And the community, they're the ones benefiting from these schools. They're also a client. So getting community members involved, getting the academics involved, understands the community at large is ultimately your client. It kind of puts things in perspective a little bit differently. Like, yes, you can make this one person happy who writes your checks, or you can make everybody pretty happy, but not get all of those baselines. So it's kind of a matter of perspective to us, I think.
That's interesting. I've done a lot of work with communities, and I always say it's a success. And I tell people, you're not going to get everything you want, but everybody's going to get something they want. And
Absolutely.
it's a matter of compromise. And I'm happy to see that you identify client, not the guy who signs the contract and signs the check, but the users and everyone in the community who's involved with that project. So
Yeah, if you let any one of those three categories, they all have very different priorities. Let any one of those three categories run amok, but turning them together and bringing them all together as a team, that's when really, really great things happen.
I always ask this question. What project in your career do you think has had the most impact on the public, that being students, education, and parents and teachers in your community? And what was that impact?
So, just much like client, community can be looked at in a number of ways as well, right? There's micro communities, there's neighborhoods, there's developments, and then there's, the Southwest Florida community, and there's communities in between. As far as impact goes, for the larger scale community, the water school, I believe that I showed some photos of, that's a really important issue to us. Our water quality is directly engaged with our way of life, with our health. Uh, I distinctly remember those algae blooms, and it's not nice having a sore throat for 4 months a year. So just your general well-being and the impact is at the highest level in that particular one itself. But then when I look at that education center that we did at, you know, in the Harlem Heights neighborhood, that's a micro community, but that is also extremely impactful in a way. The students that go there need to be brought up to speed to get into the public school system. They probably don't speak English. They speak a variety of languages. They're from difficult home lives, and we volunteer quite a bit out there. Giving away turkeys on Thanksgiving and supporting foundations here and there. And that was actually an epicenter or a hub of recovery after Hurricane Ian. That whole community got about 3 feet of water, every house in it, and that building stayed dry. Everyone naturally migrated there, and it was a drop-off point. So we were out there within a day or two, folding donated clothes and distributing them. Having all these families come through because they lost everything. The people that work in that community, when they lost their homes, the vast majority of them worked on Fort Myers Beach in the hospitality industry of some sort. Whether it's housekeeping or kitchen, that's just the nature of what that community supported and where those people work. Fort Myers Beach being as damaged as it was, and then their neighborhood flooding. So they not only lost what they had, they lost their livelihood at the same time. So, helping those 80, 90 families is also extremely impactful and kind of profound in a way to be able to do that, go out there and give that level of support. So, kind of balance both ends of that spectrum, and you want to get every level in between. It would be the goal.
During Ian, your firm was very instrumental in mobilizing and being out there for the community and giving donations and gathering stuff. Very little to do with architecture, but a lot to do with humanity and society. So I commend you and your firm for stepping up and doing that in that 2 or 3 weeks immediately after Ian.
Yeah, I'm living in a camper out in my driveway. But at the same time, there's people worse off than me. What can we do? Let's go figure it out. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And as everything goes here, like all the great stuff we shot, that's our team. We've got an amazing team of young professionals here. We keep our office really young. And when it goes wrong, if anything goes bad, it costs too much, that's my fault. I take blame, they get the credit. So that's just how we work.
That's admirable for a leader. Good leaders.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And Ron, you have an extraordinary body of work. It's clear.
Thank you so much. Appreciate
You're
that.
passionate about what you do.
And you have to be in a way, To be any good at it without passion, then it's just sterile.
Brian, thank you for your time. Thank you for putting some images together. It was exciting. And Rhonda's right. You do have a wonderful body of work, and you should be very proud. You and your firm should be very proud of what you're doing.
Thank you so much, all. I really appreciate the invite and appreciate the time.
Thank you for your contribution to this most influential building typology, clearly setting the bar for design excellence. And thank you for being here today. Stephen, thank you for serving as co-chair and bringing such interesting guests on board.
Always a pleasure to work with you, Rhonda.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Architecture and You. Stay tuned for future episodes as Stephen and I explore examples of how architecture improves our life in ways we might not expect. This is Rhonda Hammond, AIA, your host of The Voice of Florida Architecture, a podcast of AIA Florida. Thank you for listening. You can find us wherever you stream your podcast.